Hey gang, Professor McElroy here. It's about 6:35. Let me just double check. Yep, the door's closed. Welcome to the world of digital illustration. We'll be navigating through Illustrator, kind of hence the name Digital Illustration. By far my favorite Adobe CC application, hands down, bar none. I've been using Illustrator for about 30 years. I'm a tinkerer, a doodler, a drawer. It doesn't matter whether you're any of the above. You can use Adobe Illustrator. You can do digital illustrations. You can create vector graphics, scalable vector graphics. You can do all that stuff. So that's the beauty of the application. We have tons of resources at our fingertips. I noticed in the grade book, we have some newbies. We have some students who have done coursework with me before. We have that's okay. All right. That's okay. That's okay. I was just pausing for a second. Mute that so that, because you don't need to stream me while I'm here. Okay. So you can see it. Okay. All right. No problem. All right. Okay. So we're in Zoom world. We're technology enhanced coursework at Hodges, which all of you already know. So I noticed in the grade book, some students are totally online. They're going to watch this recording later of my desktop share. Some students log on, like to watch it live and then watch it later recorded. And some students come to the lab to interact physically in the classroom with the computers in the space. All of the above is okay, as long as we're meeting the outcomes for the coursework. And in that case, it's drawing digitally. So that's what we're going to be doing in the class over the next 4 weeks. Those of you that have seen Canvas before kind of know how to navigate through Canvas, kind of know the structure of the coursework and how Hodges works. We use a master template. All the courses look exactly the same, or at least they should look exactly the same as far as the module setup, the weekly folders, the names of the tabs, and where you locate to navigate, to grab things, to do things. So hopefully nothing kind of looks new to you, but we're going to navigate through the course real quick through Canvas as we get started. As most of you who have had me before, you already know, I like to start at 6:30. We're streaming live here. I'm recording everything I record. I post in the announcement section with a link and a password. Passwords are kind of a pain in the butt, but it's because we have Zoom bombers and all these people getting into the courses that aren't supposed to. We attach a password now to linkage to get into our Zoom for our desktop share and our recording. Know if you're watching the recording later, there's also a password that I post in the announcement section for you to watch the recording later. So just know that there is a password to get into this stuff. It looks like the students who needed to log in have logged in already, so that's really good. Remember, I like to do about a 2-hour lecture. We'll start at 6:30, go to about 8:30. And then at 8:30, I tend to open the lab up. If students are in the lab and they want to mess around with the software a little bit, it gives them time to do that. If you're online and you want to tinker around a little bit with the software on your home computer, you can do that. And for those that are watching the recording later as a totally online class, it gives them a nice compact 2-hour lecture to watch. I don't like to go over that, so I try to stay at the hour and 45 minutes if at all possible. But like Illustrator, I love. I draw every day. I tinker around with it every single day. I design logos. I do illustrations. I do all kinds of stuff. And Illustrator happens to be a software application I use very often along with Photoshop. InDesign, yes, I still do that. Adobe CC applications in general, Adobe Animate, Premiere, After Effects. I used to use Muse and Fireworks. I've been in the industry using it for 20 plus years. I've literally been using the foundational software for almost 30 years. So I feel very comfortable in all of the applications and the professional application of it, knowing that as we navigate through coursework, if professional projects, things you like to build for a friend, a family member, things come up during the class that you would like to build that will still showcase the outcomes of the coursework, I'm okay with opening up a dialogue about that. You got a family member, you got a friend, they need a logo, you want to draw it in Illustrator. I'm okay with you using that as part of our coursework as we navigate through our projects. So let's just keep a dialogue going. We want to meet the outcomes for the course, but I also want to teach you the professional application of why we use the software and what it is best used for. Okay, that's the end of my shtick for digital illustration and kind of the introduction. Know that I use the announcement section often in this course, so please check it more than once a week. Maybe 2 or 3 times a week. It's how I do blast emails to the students because Canvas isn't as easy as Blackboard was for sending out mass emails. I kind of now have to use the announcement section unless I'm sending direct emails to you in a specific cohort or a specific student. So just know I lean on that. And also notice that I post the lecture file for tonight that we're going to trace and doodle around with. And I'm going to teach you some drawing tools and skills and best practices. And I'm going to kind of cover the kind of micro skills that we're going to learn in Learning Module 1, Week 1. So just know that I share files, I post student work, I post professional articles, just things that I think are cool. Know that I'm a lifelong learner. Yes, I have a terminal degree in design. I went to school forever. I've been designing for 30 years. That doesn't mean I don't learn every single day. So when I see something cool, I like to post it. The software is always evolving. What I used in 1990 for Adobe Illustrator is totally different than 2022 and beyond. Like the software is evolving like unbelievably. So just know that I'm learning too. And I try to show you whatever's happening in the world that might be cool. Also know that there's no such thing as a new design. It's your take on an old design, right? It's kind of like fashion. Bell-bottom jeans came back around. Design comes back around. So just know that as we're exploring and we're learning and we're researching and we're doing, there's lots of things out there to feed your brain. So hopefully this is the only course you have for the 4 weeks session here in September, and you can really dive into it, play around with it, enjoy it, and kind of learn and feed your brain, because I like to do it and I will continue to do it. And hopefully this flickers a little light for something that you might like or might be interested in. So hopefully you find something out of the course that's enjoyable that you would like to replicate over and over again. If nothing else, it's a new skill, new application, something that maybe you could apply for a future opportunity, future design job, future client, that sort of thing. So just know you don't have to love to draw in order to be a good digital illustrator. So I'm going to throw that right out front, because everyone gets nervous. Oh, I can't draw. I don't like pen and paper. We can draw without that. So just be aware of that. But we are going to do a little doodling in here digitally. So hopefully you'll kind of maybe find a little thing that you didn't know you really liked as you kind of navigate through. Okay, we'll download this file in a minute, but I'm just going to bounce through a couple of the folder structures just so that we're all on the same page as we start our session these 4 weeks. The beauty is we're early on in the week. So the lecture's Tuesdays, and that gives us all the way till next Tuesday for lecture number 2 for us to play around with projects, start learning some things, and gives you a little time. I don't love the Thursday classes, which we do offer some, obviously, in all degree disciplines, but students wait till Thursday to do anything, and it feels like they're already kind of like 3/4 of a week behind. And so starting early in the week, we're going to jump right in and we're going to do. Remember, you can access the software from vlab.hodges.edu. You can log in with your credentials from Hodges, jump right in and use the software. Just know that it's connected to our cloud service and that it's actually a computer sitting in room 220. So if you have a slower than normal internet speed, or you might be in a place where you don't get great connectivity, you have to be patient. The key with it is that Adobe is really small file size for Illustrator. They're vector graphics with fills and strokes. So the struggle isn't nearly as real as it is with Premiere and After Effects, which is a video editing software and logo animation software. That's a bigger beast. Illustrator, not so much. So hopefully everyone gets comfortable with that. And obviously you can go to adobe.com and a student discount for, I don't know, $19.99 or something for the 30 days. You can download the entire Creative Cloud if you want to play around with it. Some students choose to do that, but just know we're an Illustrator and we're only using Illustrator for the 4 weeks that we're in here. Okay, so that brings us into the module. If you've never accessed things like your book before, you access it from the Vital Source digital materials area. I'm probably going over things other people in the class kind of already know. I just want to highlight it for the newbies that you access your digital book from a digital bookshelf found right here. So you click on this, it's going to run its little thing and it's going to load our vector book. It's a really great book. I'm going to show you where the student files are. Everyone learns a little bit differently. So we are going to have like mini project embedded in our chapters, little follow along things to go along with our out of book, to go along with our interactive lecture, just because students learn differently, right? Not everyone learns the same way. Some people want to open up and take a look and say, this is the pen tool, this is a Bezier curve, you click here, you click here, the book is showing me, this is really easy. Others are like, I got to hear Professor McElroy, I want to hear him talk, I want to see him do it on the screen. Everyone learns a little bit differently. Just know that we try to leverage a little bit of a follow along content with my interactive lectures with a little self-exploration. So we kind of try to cover every kind of learning in the process of kind of gravitating to these skills. So if you've never accessed the book before, you access it from there. You'll also notice that right here, I've downloaded every single file for our chapters for our book. So not often can I do that because the intro to your books will say, hey, go to this website and download these files. Sometimes they're enormous and Canvas won't let me embed them in the coursework. Illustrator is not one of them. I actually downloaded all the files, zipped them up into chapter assignments, and stuck them in our student files link in the Start Here learning module. So you can download those. Make sure you download them to a thumb drive or your personal computer, whatever you're going to be working on, so that you can save, open again, play around with, save, open again, play around with. So accessing to our book is from our digital bookshelf. Our files for our reading chapter assignments, the ones you'll have for homework to read, are attached here. They're also awesome files to practice on. They're really professional logos, digital illustrations. You can manipulate them. You can select the nodes. You can change colors or shapes. Like, it starts with a really good file to practice on. So that's where you access your book. That's where you access your reading chapters for your homework, and access to the student files that are attached to your reading chapters. Now, I say this to every student because some students are like, yeah, well, that logo was cool, but can I go on the internet and download a picture of some other logo that I think is really cool and practice the pen tool on that? I'm perfectly okay with that. You don't have to use the digital files attached with any reading or any practice work that I give you for homework, as long as it's reflective of the skills. So our first few chapters are about the Pathfinder tool, the pen tool, and basic drawing. I don't care if you draw the logo from chapter 2, doodle around with it, add text. You can download your own picture and put it in Illustrator and draw over the top of it and play with it, as long as you're learning the basic tools of the application. We're going to draw tonight on some files that I am downloading that we're going to download together. So there are many ways to do it. Many students like to use the digital files provided because they're pretty cool and they're professional files and they look pretty cool, but it's okay if you want to download and doodle something else. Maybe you really like the Chicago Bears and you want to download the bear icon that they use for their logo and you want to practice drawing the bear. I'm okay with that. If that's inspiration that causes you to learn what we're trying to do here, I'm okay with that. I've been doing digital illustration teaching for a really long time too. And as long as you get inspired and you practice and you spend a little time using the tools that we're learning, you always get a bigger reward. So I try to make it where you become inspired based on what you might be interested in. Maybe you're in a company, maybe you drive a Budweiser truck and you always interact with their branding, their packaging, and you want to download a Clydesdale horse and trace over the top of it and learn to draw a little bit. I'm okay with that. I just want to make sure that we're meeting the outcomes of the course and that you're learning a new skill that you can play around and practice with. Okay, so that brings us to our learning module 1. Now, the course is broken up into 4 learning modules, 1 for each week. Really easy process to remember. We want to try to complete our learning module 1 by next Tuesday at 6:30. So we have 2 mini chapter follow along projects. The first is the pen tool and the second is the Pathfinder tool. We're going to do both tools tonight as our lecture. We're going to open the software. We're going to draw with the pen tool. I'm going to show you best practices. We're going to talk about fills and strokes and scalability and all the basic drawing tools. And we're also going to use the Pathfinder tool. We're going to unite and we're going to subtract. And I'm going to show you how those two tools work. If you want to create your own illustration using the pen tool and the Pathfinder tool and submit it as chapter 1 and 2's assignment, I'm okay with that. If you love Disney and you want to draw Mickey Mouse and you want to cut his eyes out with the Pathfinder tool and trace the outline of Mickey Mouse with the pen tool and you want to submit it for chapter 1 and 2, I'm fine with that. If you learn best by following the book step by step and drawing the logo and the Pathfinder cutout from chapter 1 and 2 and give me that, I'm perfectly fine with that too. No, I need the Illustrator file. When you submit the file to me, it should be a .ai file. And it also should have your last name in the name of the file. So when you do file save as, make sure you add your last name and the project. So last name chapter 1, last name chapter 2, .ai. If you choose to draw a third-party thing like a logo, I'm from Baltimore, I love the Orioles and the Ravens. If I want to draw the Oriole bird, just make sure you name it your last name, OrioleBird.ai, and you can give it to me for chapter 1 and 2. But please make sure that whether you choose to do the step-by-step or create something new that inspires you, that it does meet the outcomes of the chapter. So make sure that you're at least reading those 2 chapters. They aren't long, they don't take a long time, but let's just make sure that we're reflective of the things we're trying to learn from those first 2 chapters. They're not long, really, they're not long, and they're big pictures all over them, but do make sure you read them. We leverage the terminology, we leverage the content as I teach you the ability to draw vector shapes. Okay, so that brings us to every week we have a discussion topic. It's a time to share something that you thought was cool that you may have found doing Google searches or watching videos or reading the book. Share something cool. Maybe you saw a cool digital illustration at the food store for a cereal box. You take a picture of it on your phone and you paste it in the design sample or the topic share. It's a student-to-student learning tool where hopefully students inspire each other. You can walk through the food store and there's a million digital illustrations all over the food store, from packaging to labels to the point of purchase displays. One of my first jobs was at Pepsi designing point of purchase displays. I did the Super Bowl displays. I did pretty much every major event that Pepsi advertised. I helped build the illustration displays for them. I was part of their point of purchase design team. It was back when the Get Brisk Baby campaign was really popular with 3D modelings of Rocky Balboa and all these different characters. I did all the print packaging, signage, point of purchase stuff for Pepsi way back in the day. That was kind of a cool job. Okay, so that's an opportunity to share. Don't wait until Monday night at midnight to share something cool. If you're working on your projects, share something cool earlier. That's how you kind of interact and learn and kind of teach each other. It's important. We live in a world of Zoom right now. We live in a world of distance learning. One of the reasons people love design and design as a career is you can do it from your house. You can design for anyone around the world from your house. I have 2 clients right now in the Netherlands. They pay me. I transfer, I roll it over to American dollars using PayPal. I wait till the exchange is really high so I make my most money. You can design anywhere, out of your car, at a campsite, with your laptop. You literally can do this job from anywhere at any time. That's what's really attractive to a lot of people. So just know that there's so many cool things to share remotely. I have clients I've never even seen their face. I just give them what they're looking for. They give me feedback. We finalize the project. I give them the artwork and they pay me. So just know that technology is important in any field of IT, and commercial art / graphic artist / graphic designer / what digital designer, whatever term you want to use for what we do nowadays. It's a opportunity to connect with people around the world. So get comfortable submitting an assignment and posting to a discussion board and just interacting in an online environment. Okay. And that brings us to our out of book project. So I like to normally try to start some version of the out of book project, teaching you the skills from the learning module in our lecture. So we're actually going to do a little doodle illustration. I'm going to teach you some of the tools, and then I'm going to go out and maybe grab the Oriole bird and put it into Illustrator as a template, and we're just going to draw over the top of it. Your out of book project for this week is to do a digital illustration. You can do a sports mascot. I like Matt's Red Hots, which is a local little corner family owned. The guy was a hockey player, an NHL player. He opened this kind of little greasy spoon hot dog and burger joint. He has a huge mural of Matt's Red Hots with a little hot dog on the side. I thought it would be cool to maybe do a little digital illustration of a hot dog, some kind of little hot dog mascot. If we get some good ones, I'll go talk to Matt and see if we can't get a couple of t-shirts made out of it or something. So he's always open for student work. So I always try to connect you to the community. So let's see how we do with our mascot and our little hot dog illustrations, and then see if we can't turn it into a real world project. So that is our learning module 1. You won't see learning module 2, learning module 3, or learning module 4 until we get the week that is. So like Sunday night, I'll turn on learning module 2 for next week. I want you to concentrate just on this week, opening the book, downloading the student files, posting to the discussion board, and doing your mascot illustration. That's it. I want you to concentrate on that. That alone is going to be 6, 7, 8 hours probably. When you get into Illustrator and start drawing, that's when time really ticks away. Not as much as video editing, but it still goes pretty quickly. Hopefully it's fun. The reason that you're taking a technology course is because you like software, you like computers, and you want to learn something new. Every GRA class that you take here at Hodges, you're going to learn at least one skill that you could apply professionally. So just keep that in mind. We try to give you granular skills one course at a time, but we're trying to create something that you could apply in the real world immediately. You could do a freelance job. You could start creating logos. There's lots of things you can do with just basic digital illustration class. I sit on a couple of boards. One of the boards I sit on is Keep Lee County Beautiful. I just drew all of the vector graphics for their vehicle wraps for their new trucks. They're getting installed on Thursday. I did it in Illustrator. I drew the entire vehicle graphics in Illustrator. I gave the file to the printer. She's going to take the Dodge Ram 1500 pickup trucks up there, and they're going to wrap the vehicles this week, take some pictures, send them over to me. And so I'll post them in the announcement section so you can see what they look like. I got the design bug. I love it. I'm passionate about it. I teach full-time here, and I do design on the side. I juggle 3, 4, 5 clients at a time, whether it's building a website, designing a logo, creating a mini social media video for them. I just love it. So hopefully something here gravitates to you and you're like, yes, I love this thing. Okay, that's the end of the spiel. Let's get into the announcement section and download our student file, because we're going to draw tonight. I don't know how many of you have touched Illustrator before. I don't know how many of you have used the pen tool before. I don't know the names. Some are new, some are a little bit older names, but everybody, it looks like, has an inspiration or a little bit of learning in the digital world. So let's go here. We're going to download files. I have to tell you, I'm almost 48 years old. I still like cartoons. I still watch some animation style little clips, whether I go to Apple TV and I'm watching one of the little cartoons they make, or a Minion movie or something like that. My kids laughed all the times because I have 2 teenagers, and sometimes I'll turn on like Clone Wars from Star Wars and just watch a little bit of it because I enjoy the quality behind digital illustration, drawing digitally. So I really love that. So, so I thought Ben 10 is just a little cartoon my kids used to watch when they're little. I think it's been around forever, at least for quite a number of years. I think it might be Nintendo, Nickelodeon or something like that. I thought we'd draw a little bit so I could show you the pen tool and kind of how it works. And you can download the lecture file right here by clicking this little icon right here. If it's your PC world, it goes to your download folder. If you're working in old Mac world, which I happen to be a Mac guy, I'm an Apple computer guy. I got an iPhone, 2 iPads, 2 MacBook Pros, an iMac. All my kids have all iPhones and everything. So I'm a Mac guy. So if you're a Mac guy, then it downloaded at the bottom of your browser, and you can just drag and drop it over here to the desktop. So whether you access the file via your download folder on your PC, or whether you access it via the Mac where it downloads to the little browser window right here and you can drag and drop it. I'm going to show you a lot of drag and drop techniques, a lot of right clicking techniques, a lot of different things, because it's kind of how I learned short key commands, different ways of doing things. So hopefully that is a shortcut. Like time is money for me. Like, you know, like I get paid an hourly rate and I bundle that up into the cost of how much it costs to build things. And so I want to do things as quickly as I can, short keys, right clicking. So I'm going to try to teach you a lot of the same techniques as we're kind of punching along here. So, okay, we downloaded our file. I'm going to go ahead and close that. I'm going to rename this file right away. So you can either right click on the file and do rename, or you can click once and then click again and it highlights the name. And we're just going to call it lecture1 underscore McElroy, which is my last name, .ai. Everyone should have their last name in their file. And this will be the file. .ai will be the file that you give me in return, right? So .ai is the file that I want. You can save as a PDF, file save as, and one of the options will be Adobe PDF. That's fine as well, because it will flatten your file and make it a little bit smaller. But I like the Illustrator file because I can see the layers. I can kind of see what you're doing with groupings. I could see a little bit more when I have the source file than when I have a PDF file that we're navigating through. Okay, so I renamed it. That's a good practice, right? Something with design is organization. When you're working on projects, you should have a folder on your computer or your thumb drive called Digital Illustration Class. And we call that a root directory. And then inside that folder, you should have the files of the client names. And in this case, the client names are the Out of Book project or the lecture number and your last name. That's really a good best practice. So I'm going to make a new folder on my desktop and I'm going to call it digital underscore illustration, right? This is called your root directory. And then inside your root directory is called your subdirectory. So if I drag and drop this inside my root directory, inside of it is where I put my files. I could also have a folder in here called subdirectories that I could do learning module 1. So if I wanted to do learning module 1, I could dump the lecture inside learning module 1. Organization is really important in all fields, but it's really important as well in design. So you should organize folders based on clients, or in this case, classes. And then inside your classes folder should be what are called subdirectories. And those subdirectories are where you put your, in this case, learning module 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then your stuff inside there. Now, I could go even one step further and say inside your learning module 1 folder, you should have folders that are specific. So learning module 1, I would have a folder inside of that called Out of Book or Mascot. Inside there, I would have my Illustrator file. The more organized you are with your folder structure, in the end, the easier it is years and years down the road to find what you may have created. And I say years and years down the road because I have a client I've had for 20 years. I designed the original packaging designs for all of their fuel injector parts they sold for big train companies. It's actually out of Naples. And I still, this day, edit their boxes that they ship the fuel injector parts out in. I designed the packaging. And so even this day, 20 years later, they'll reach out to me and say, hey, do you remember in 2015, we changed the eco injector box from blue to green and we swapped out a couple of images? And I'm like, yeah, oh, can you do that again, but change the date on the copyright and the patent number and all that? And I'm like, sure. If I didn't organize it well and have that client folder named with a root directory and a subdirectory folders inside of it, so like eco injector would be a subdirectory folder inside the client folder, it would be very hard for me to find files. So be organized in the process. So try to do that no matter what computer you're working on. Okay, we got our file downloaded. So we're going to minimize our browser and you'll notice that my digital illustration folder's there and I've learning module 1 and here's my lecture 1 file. That's the one we're going to open in Illustrator. So I'm going to go down here and I'm just going to go to AI. If you're on a Mac, your Illustrator will appear down here in your dock. If you're on vlab.hodges.edu, you're opening up a web browser and clicking on Illustrator, and Illustrator is actually opening in a cloud window that you're accessing it from. If you're on a PC and you download Illustrator from Adobe to your computer, it will be in your Programs tab when you click on the little Microsoft little icon over here on the left-hand side. Like I said, I'm a Mac guy. The software works the same on Mac and PC, so I'm comfortable in both operating systems, but I certainly prefer an Apple computer just by nature. And I have to say that because every industry I've ever worked in, whether it was an ad agency or an engineering firm or corporate America like Pepsi, the marketing department always had a Mac. I mean, that's just the nature of the beast, because they always used to be really good graphic driven computers, right? PCs are just as good now, right? You could get a Sony or a Dell, and they do Alienware machine or anything like that. They all do pretty good, but I'm in the ecosystem of the iCloud. And so I'm a Mac guy. So I'm going to click on Illustrator, and you can click on the open tab. You can go to file, open up here, however you want to do it. And we're just going to open the Illustrator file. Know that on Illustrator, you open up your window here, and you should have your access to your computer over here, depending on where you put your folder or where you downloaded your file. We need to go in and we need to grab that file that I created and open it, and give it a second, and it's going to open, and it's going to have a watermarked image of Ben 10 that I created in essence on layer number 1. And then here's our artboard. So now we're going to take a look at how Illustrator functions. It's exactly the same as the Adobe ECC programs. They all kind of function the same way, but we want to kind of take a look at where things are, so you kind of get comfortable on how it is in Illustrator. And if this is the first time you've used Illustrator, how you then could transfer the knowledge of where things are here to where they would be in Photoshop, or where they would be in Dreamweaver, or where they'd be in Adobe Animate. They all kind of function in the same environment. So I'm going to try to explain it very kind of easy, simplistic structure, so you kind of know what to look for depending on where you are. Okay, so we have our file open. I'm going to hold down the space bar, because you're going to notice when I hold down the space bar, it becomes a hand. It becomes a hand so I can grab and move my document around. So I can grab and move my document around. Spacebar is really important, because no matter what tool you use in the toolbar over here, you can always hold the spacebar to move around. I'm really big at zooming in, zooming out, and panning my image, or moving around my image. And you do that by holding the spacebar down. So no matter what tool you're in, you can always use the spacebar to pan around. So this is what's called our artboard, the white document the image is on. Everything dark gray over here is called the paste board. What exists in the dark gray actually doesn't exist in our document. Only what is on the artboard is what exists in our document. So anything you want to use as kind of preliminary stuff that you're not using for your final illustration, you can put over here. Only the things here are what matter in our final illustration. The reason I say that is because I could be drawing something, and I could put a bunch of little illustrations over here that I might not use all of. I can put them over here and just use what I want to use over here. So this is called the artboard. This is called the paste board. It's different in other programs because you can't always see what's on your paste board. Like Photoshop, you can't see what's over here. Illustrator, you can see what's over here. So just know that what's in the artboard is the most important, which is right here. So that's lesson number 1. Lesson number 2 is this is the toolbar, and we're going to use the basic drawing tools right up here for week number 1 or learning module 1. So we're going to use the selection arrow, direct select, we're going to use the pen tool, we're going to use shape tool, I'm going to show you the paintbrush, the text tool, the rotate tool. So we're going to stay kind of up in this neck of the woods for our learning module 1. Just basic drawing, just learning how to do basic shapes and drawing. This is called your toolbar. Over here on the right-hand side are called your palettes. Think of palettes as a group of information, kind of like a folder, that is similar things that all kind of have a common behavior or attribute. These are called the essential palettes. There are a bunch of palettes. They all exist under the window drop down, but you'll actually notice some of those things are already opened over here. So you see artboards is right there, but it's also right here. So if you ever see something when you're reading your book, like, oh, the Pathfinder tool, and it's not over here, You can open it by going to the window drop down and picking it over here under Pathfinder. I can tell you the Pathfinder tool is right there. So we already have it open. But if there's something when you're reading or following along and trying to see, well, I don't see that on the right-hand side, it's under your window drop down. That's where all your palettes are. You'll probably know or notice that at the top right-hand corner, it says Essentials. The reason it says Essentials is because this workspace is set up with the very basic tools, the essential tools that you might need for drawing or creating a digital illustration. You'll also notice that Adobe has hundreds of people that work on every software application, and they continue to add workspaces over here. So web is a new one, right? Illustrator was always just used for drawing scalable graphics, illustrations. Well, now designers use it for the web. So you'll notice there is a web workspace preset. I'm a traditionalist. I use Illustrator to draw vector graphics. I use Essentials. So if ever you open yours up and for some reason you deleted something like a palette over here, you can always go to Workspace, reset Essentials, and it will reset the workspace for you. Now, I know I give you a lot as I'm lecturing. Know that this is being recorded and will be posted in the announcement section. So follow along, listen, play a little bit. You don't have to do exactly what I'm doing, because you can always watch back later and do exactly what I'm doing. It's always funny. Students are always like, my significant other's like, whose voice is talking in our office all night long? And they'll be like, oh, it's Professor McElroy, it's Chip. He's just lecturing, and I'm replaying it over and over and over again as I'm learning how to use the pen tool. And they're like, oh, okay. All right. So just know that follow along. You can tinker a little bit. You can draw. When we use the pen tool, if you want to continue to mess around with the pen tool, you can always watch me share my desktop as the recording later. Like I said, I try to keep it about 2 hours or less. So you can always go back and watch it later in a recording. So just kind of stick with me as I'm navigating and highlighting a few things. Okay. Toolbar on the left-hand side, palettes on the right-hand side. Really important. Properties is probably one of the key palettes in Adobe Illustrator, and honestly, all of the Adobe programs when accessing and navigating through objects in your software, because the properties is what sets your application for each thing you select. What are the properties of the things you have selected? If nothing is selected in any of your Adobe CC programs and you click on the properties window, you will get the properties of the document. In this case, the artboards. You'll notice that the properties of the artboard, because I have nothing selected, will appear over there. The minute I draw something and select it, the properties will change. And students always get a little confused. They're like, oh my gosh, why does my properties window look different than the properties window in the book? Because the book may have an object that was created, selected, and these properties look different than when nothing is selected. So just keep that in mind. And we'll do some best practices as we're drawing, so everyone kind of does the same thing. Okay. Next to the properties tab is the layers tab. So if your layers tab isn't open, remember you can go to Windows and click on layers and you will get your layers tab. Now, it's very easy to draw everything in Illustrator on one layer. It's nearly impossible to do that in Photoshop, because everything you create in Photoshop adds a new layer. Illustrator, you can literally draw everything on one layer. Well, that's not necessarily best practices. So you'll actually notice that I preset your document with what I call a template layer and a drawing layer. A template layer and a drawing layer. And you'll actually notice the drawing layer is locked, which means I can't select the image. Now, when we import the Oriole bird that we're going to tinker around with a little bit at the end of the lecture for your out of book project, we'll actually create a new document and we will create this structure from scratch. I did it already to start with so that it made life a little bit easier for what we were trying to draw and create here as our lecture. So I preset it up for us. So this document already has an image that I downloaded from the internet and placed in my artboard and locked it as the template layer. We'll do this process when we bring the Oriole bird in at the end of the lecture. So don't worry about the fact that this thing is already kind of set up to be drawn on top of, because when we start the mascot illustration, we'll do this from scratch. We'll start from scratch and do this. So just know that I preset it for you and I locked it, which means the only thing that I can draw on right now is the art layer. Really important to structure and organize your files. Okay. Now, we're going to do a little drawing using tools in Illustrator, and we're going to use this illustration as a template. And so when I say you don't need to know how to draw in order to be an illustrator, that means we could actually import photographs of things that we would like to doodle and draw right over the top of the photograph. When I was in school many moons ago, we would scan in photos and import them in and draw over the top of them out of magazines, or we took our own pictures, or we would use a light table. So we would print an image, bring the image in, use a tracing paper, put it over top the image, and I would draw the lines for the image over top of the image on the light board. And then when I was done doodling it, I would scan it, bring it into Illustrator and make it a drawing. Well, we've bypassed all those processes now. Now we have 14 billion web pages, images at our fingertips. We can download whatever we want and we can draw over the top of it. So we kind of bypass the light table, tracing paper, all the tactile experiences of a commercial artist is what they used to call us a few moons ago. And so now it's digital design because that's a fancy word, but we're commercial artists, right? We're artists that create things for a commercial application. Okay, so that brings us over to doing some drawing. So the first thing we're going to take a look at are the first few tools over here in our toolbar. The first one, the most simplest one, is the shape tool. So if I click on my mouse and I hold down the rectangle tool in our toolbar, you're going to see this expansion or explosion of extra shapes we can draw that are preset shapes in Illustrator. So we have rectangle, we have circle or ellipse, we have the polygon, multi-sided, we have stars, and we have a basic line segment. So let's select the basic line segment tool. So it looks like that, a little diagonal line. So we're just going to draw a line so you can see what it looks like, what a node is, how you select the points, how you manipulate the line, and what a fill and a stroke means. Now, with our line segment tool, let's move over here into our artboard, because remember, if we draw it over here, it's not really something that exists. It's only a practice line. It only exists really, truly, if we create it on our artboard. Now, before we draw that line, know these two little rectangles down, or these two little squares in the bottom of our toolbar is called fill and stroke. So fill is the color inside of a shape, and the stroke is the line that makes up the shape. So what makes Illustrator different than Photoshop is that we're dealing in shapes that have a fill, a color on the inside, and stroke, a line on the edge of it. We have color in the inside and color on the edge of the shape. Why that's important? If there's color on the inside and color on the edge, we can make that square, that rectangle, that line, the size of a stamp, or as big as a billboard on the side of the biggest building you can think of, and it's still crystal clear. It's still perfect for printing. So you can make a mural that's 100 feet by 100 feet, and the line we draw right here that's 1 inch by 1 inch will look perfect at 100 inch by 100 inch or 100 foot by 100 foot, the same as 1 inch by 1 inch. The difference is in Photoshop, that line is made up of pixels, which you know as DPI or PPI, a TV screen, a monitor. They're made up of colors, made of little squares of color. The more little squares of color, the higher the definition. 4K, 5K, 8K, right? 300 DPI, 600 DPI. Phones keep getting better. 5,000 pixels wide on your little phone, right? Resolution, that's what it's called, keeps getting bigger and bigger, but it's still only as good as the resolution. So if I draw a line 1 inch by 1 inch, even if it's 8K in resolution, if I want to blow that up to 1 100 feet by 100 feet, it's going to be blurry because you can't replicate the little squares of color from 1 inch by 1 inch to 100 feet by 100 feet. So think of anything that's created that's big in scale or really small in scale. Traditionally, they are vector based, or they're made up of shapes that have fills and strokes. So even a little tiny stamp that has a strawberry on it, that strawberry is actually a vector image of the strawberry. So they can make it as small as a stamp, or they can make it as big as a billboard for Fresh Market or Publix or Wegmans or Piggly Wiggly or whatever food store you go to. That strawberry looks so good on the billboard. It's not a photograph. It's a vector drawing of the strawberry, just a really good one, so that they can make it that big and that clear. So just know, Illustrator is to create images that need to be the size of a stamp or as big as a 100-foot wide mural, right? That's the power of Illustrator. And that's why I love Illustrator. So Illustrator is selecting and manipulating fills and strokes. That's all it is. That's it in its simplest form. Selecting, drawing, manipulating fills and strokes. And how complicated that is how powerful the tool is. And don't be fooled by things that look photographic and think they're photos. If you use Illustrator to its greatest power, really well-drawn illustrations can look like photographs. We're going to start with baby steps, so we're just creating illustrations that look like illustrations, but making them digitally. Okay, so you'll notice that our fill is white and our stroke is black. That's kind of the default in Illustrator. If yours isn't that, it doesn't matter, because you can double click on the fill and you can change the color by the spectrum, or you can go to your color palette, which is this little tab over here. You can change your color this way by using the sliders for your fill or your stroke, or you can go to the swatches palette and you can pick the preset swatches. Now, next week, we're going to talk about color books, Pantone colors, and the colors like Sherwin-Williams paint colors that you can pick that will be consistent no matter whether you're making a cookie jar or you're making a t-shirt illustration. There's actually certain colors you should pick when you're creating an illustration because they're universally applied. But just know that when you go to get paint at Sherwin-Williams, they're dripping cyan, magenta, yellow, and black into that can of white to make your paint color. Illustrator's no different. It's made up of cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And whatever that percentage is what the color is made up of. So just know that it doesn't matter what wacky color you peel off your wall that someone painted 25 years ago that you take to Home Depot that they're going to color match. They're taking a white can of paint and they're dripping cyan, magenta, yellow, and black in it to create whatever that funky color is. And it's any percentage from 0% to 100% of each one of those colors in order to mix them together to make that funky color that you're looking for. So that's kind of how it works. Now, so we have fills and we have strokes for every shape we create in Illustrator. You see this little red slash line right here? That means none, no color. So if you don't want a shape to have color inside of it, you pick the none and you'll notice the little red slash there. Well, that's important if you want to create a shape that you want to be able to see something through. No color means you can see through the shape. Well, does a line segment have a fill? No, it's a line only. It actually isn't a closed shape. So your line segment isn't going to have fill no matter what. It's only going to be a stroke. You'll notice that that little square is the stroke, and that stroke can be any color, just like fill. Anything in the cyan, magenta, yellow, and black color range. Fills and strokes, both can be any color. Fills the color inside, strokes the line on the outside. Strokes also can be any thickness. So they can be itty bitty, like 0.25 points, all the way up. So it can be as thick or as thin as you want. And we'll talk about thickness of strokes and what is best practice based on what we're creating. Like the lettering right here has a stroke on it, and it has a really big stroke on it, and that's why it's creating these little rectangular cutout shapes around the letters. It's because they made a really big stroke around the letters. But we'll talk about best practices, like what works and what doesn't work. You'll notice the little eyeballs right here are green on the inside with a black stroke around the outside of it. So just know that illustrations, quotation mark illustrations, cartoons, doodles, digital drawings, oftentimes have fills and strokes to them. Okay, so that brings us to line segment. So we should have the line segment tool selected. We should have a fill of none and a stroke of black. So if your stroke isn't black, go over to your swatches tab, make sure you have the stroke square forward. See how I move that forward, and pick black. Black is one of our generic swatches in our swatch library of our CMYK swatches. When this palette expands, it kind of covers your artboard a little bit. I like to go over here and tuck the palette back. So once I pick the color, I move the palette back. So I have my maximum artboard space over here that I'm going to draw on. Okay, so no fill, stroke of black. Now, our default stroke is going to be like 1 point or something like that, but we'll adjust it later once you see how the drawing tools work. Now, I don't need to draw at all. I have this photograph right here. I'm just going to trace over the top of it so you can see how it works, see how it draws. So we're going to take our line segment tool with a fill of none and a stroke of black, and we're going to click and hold our mouse down, and we're going to drag. And you're going to notice this little guide is going to appear. I'm holding my mouse down. I haven't let my mouse go, and I'm just dragging. So you see how I can make this line any length, any angle, any distance I want. So I'm going to drag it a decent distance, and I'm going to let it go. Now, I've, in essence, drawn a line to a certain length with no fill, a black stroke. It happens to be 1 point, and I created this diagonal line. Now, I'm going to do Command plus on my keyboard to zoom in. I think it's Control plus on the PC. I'm not positive on the PC. And we're going to zoom in. So I'm just minus for a Mac, Command minus, zooms out, Command plus, zooms in. You can also do view, zoom in, and zoom out. I'm a short key person, so the quicker you can learn the Command key for plus and minus, and Command C for copy, and Command V for paste, and Command Z for undo, some of the basics, the quicker you will create. Now, once I create an object in Illustrator, by default, you should go back to the selection arrow, which is the top tool. So once you draw a rectangle, use the pen tool to create a shape. Once you close that shape or create the shape that you want, by default, you should go back to the selection arrow. The reason I do that is to make sure I don't click and drag line segment over line segment over line segment. Once I create my line, I want to manipulate my line. So I'm creating one object at a time, manipulating it, making it the way I want, and then going on to my next line, if that makes sense. So I'm not creating a bunch of lines and then manipulating them. I'm doing one object at a time. In this case, I'm just creating a line segment. Now, there are two arrows up here. One is the global or the selection arrow, and the second is what we call the direct select arrow. So let's pick the basic selection arrow first. So you'll notice right here, there are what are called handles, these little white squares, and I can click and move this line from each one of those handles. So you see how I can click and drag that? Well, the handles, and if I zoom a little bit further, the handles have two properties built in them. One is just the drag property, and the other, if you notice when I move this off the edge, is the rotate property. So these handles are part of what's called a bounding box, or a box that bounds the shape, and you have the option to scale the shape, move it in and out, or rotate the shape. Those are the two properties that are part of your bounding box. Now, you also notice that there's smart guides that are turned on as default in Illustrator that kind of help you, kind of show you where this thing is moving. So if I want to move the object as one whole shape around Illustrator, I want to use my selection tool. That allows me to move it, to scale it, to rotate it as an object. If I want to select parts of the object that I created in Illustrator, I use the direct select tool. Now, the difference between the global or the selection arrow and the direct select arrow is the direct select arrow lets me to select individual points inside my shape. So you'll notice I can pick just that point, or I can pick just this point. I can manipulate the individual squares in my shape, which are called nodes. Nodes are created anywhere in a shape where the line changes direction. So think of it as an intersection point. So in a square, there are 4 points to the shape, 1 in each corner. Each one of those corners is a node. A node is where a line changes direction. Remember, fill and stroke in any object created in Illustrator. So if I zoom out, you can see all the shapes that make up this illustration: the eyeball, the little black pupil, the little highlight shape, the eyebrows, the hair. You'll actually notice in the hair, there's a dark brown and a light brown highlight. Those are actually 2 separate shapes. Each one of those shapes has a node where the line changes direction. So right at the tip of the hair up here, where the hair curves and goes that way, that is a point or a node. So just know that there is a node anywhere a line changes direction. If I want to manipulate an individual line inside my shape, I use the direct select tool. If I want to manipulate the shape as a whole, I use the regular global, or what we call the selection arrow. I call them global selection and direct selection just because it's easier to kind of understand. If I want to select the whole object, I use the selection arrow. If I want to manipulate an individual point inside of the shape, I use the direct select. I draw with my draw tools and I manipulate whether it's the whole shape or the individual parts of the shape. I use the selection arrow for the whole shape. I use the direct selection arrow for the parts of the shape. So it's easy to see in a line segment. So let's take it one step further. Let's click on the line segment tool, hold the mouse down and choose rectangle. So instead of line segment, we're going to choose rectangle. And anywhere right over here on the artboard, let's click and drag our mouse and draw a shape. Now, if I hold down Shift, I draw a perfect square. If I don't hold down Shift, I can draw any version of a rectangle I want to. Know that the Shift key is for what we call scale proportionately. So if we want to make something perfect proportionately, we hold down Shift. So that means if we're scaling it and we want to scale it proportionally, we hold down Shift. If we want to draw a circle and make it a circle, not an ellipse, we hold down Shift. Shift is the scalable, perfect proportion short key. So holding down Shift. So I'm going to make a square. So I'm just going to click and drag, doesn't matter the size, and I'm going to make a square. So I'm just going to click and drag and let go of the mouse and then let go of the Shift key. You want to let go of the mouse before the Shift key, because if you let go of the Shift key before the mouse, it will disconnect from the scale proportionately. And when you actually click the mouse, it'll snap to whatever rectangle shape you were drawing. So the Shift key gets let go after the mouse key if you're trying to scale something proportionally. Okay, so now you see what a shape looks like as it relates to selection arrows and direct select arrows. So if I now have my rectangle drawn, or square in this case, because I held down Shift, you'll notice that it has a fill of none. By a fill of none, look what's happening. You can actually see the image inside of the square, right? I can see part of the Ben 10 illustration inside of my square because there's no fill. But watch what happens when I fill it in white. I no longer can see the illustration behind it. Why is that important? Because if I'm using a photograph or I'm drawing over top of an image I'm inspired by, maybe it's a logo or a mascot or something. Like for your homework, your project, you're like, well, I'm from Nashville and the Predators are an awesome hockey team, and I want to draw the logo by bringing in a picture of it and drawing over the top of it. Kind of like when you're drawing on pen and paper, it's easier to outline first and fill in color later. Illustrator is no different. It's easier to draw the shapes with no fill because you're drawing over top of something, and then add the fill colors later. Can you add color or change color to a shape anytime you want? Absolutely. You just select it with the selection arrow. Once I select it and I get the bounding box, I can add color to it anytime I want to. So outlining everything to start with is a really good way to practice drawing. You don't have to have fill inside of your shapes as you're learning to draw. It's kind of like learning to trace something with a pencil over top of something, like I used to do with the old cartoons that were in the newspaper. I put a piece of paper over the top of it, hold it up to the window, and draw the characters over the top of it on the piece of paper with a pencil. My problem was I'm left-handed, so everything smeared as I was drawing, because as I draw something with the pencil, I would rub my hand over it and it would smear it, and then it wouldn't be perfect anymore. So then my mom bought me ballpoint pens and said, why don't you trace with this? Well, that was great because it didn't smear anymore. The problem was if I made a mistake, I had to ball up the paper and start again, right? Well, you don't have to worry about that with digital illustrations because you can always delete and draw again. Okay, so we drew the rectangle. There's no fill. There's a stroke of black, right? So let's go to our global selection arrow. And so you'll notice that the bounding box has rotate and the bounding box has scale. So you can pinch and drag any one of these handles and either rotate it or squish it or make it bigger, right? So that's see how I'm manipulating the whole shape? I'm manipulating it because I have the selection arrow selected. So you're gonna notice these little white squares are called handles. And actually this little dot inside of here is the way to control the edge of the document, but we don't need to do that right now. That controls the curve. This controls the bounding box or the edge of it. Now, this little dot right here is called the waist of or the center point of the shape that we created. That becomes an important feature in other programs because that's how we manipulate elements inside of some of our shapes when we're doing animations and things. But just know these white squares are handles. The red box is a bounding box. And when we have the regular selection arrow selected, we're selecting the entire shape. So watch what happens when we go to direct select. You're going to notice the handles disappear because it's not the whole shape we're selecting. We now can select individual points in the shape. So look at this. I just made it an arrow. I just made it a polygon. Like I can actually manipulate individual nodes of the shape I created. So I may start with a rectangle, but I can actually make it much more complicated than that if I direct select any points on my shape and manipulate them. Global selection arrow gives us the bounding box. Direct select arrow gives us the ability to select individual nodes, little squares that determine a line is changing a direction. There isn't a node in between these two dots because this line hasn't changed direction until it gets to that point. The more points, the more changes of direction in the line. The less points, the less changing of directions in the line. That is the simplistic, easiest way to describe strokes and fills using selection and direct select arrow. If someone gives you an Illustrator file and they want you to manipulate a shape inside the Illustrator file, the direct select arrow comes in handy because that's how you can click on individual parts of the vector illustration that was created by maybe the artist before you. Global selection arrow selects the box. Direct select arrow selects the nodes that make up the box or the shape. And that's, in essence, is Illustrator. Illustrator is made up of shapes, shapes that have a fill and a stroke, shapes that can be manipulated with the selection arrow for the whole shape and the direct select arrow for the parts of the shape. That's as simple as Illustrator is. Obviously, it can be far more complicated than that because illustrations can be made up of hundreds of shapes, and each shape could have fills and strokes, and each shape could have multiple nodes. So it can be complicated, but in essence, this is the foundation of what Illustrator is made up of. Lines that have fills and strokes, and it's how you make the shapes, you manipulate the shapes, and you fill and add strokes to the shapes. Most people think of Illustrator as 2D illustrations, illustrations that look flat, that have a solid color in the inside and a solid stroke on the outside. Think of cartoons. But Illustrator's far more complicated than that. Illustrator has three-dimensional tools. Illustrator has gradients. Illustrator has the ability to apply effects like drop shadows and glows. Illustrator can be much more complicated than that. Think about packaging design at the food store. If you go down the olives aisle, there are some really beautiful olives on the labels of any of the olive oils or the pre-jarred olives. Well, guess what? Those olives are drawings of the olive. It is not a photograph of the olive. So that change of color in the green olive is called a gradient fill inside the illustration of the olive. And designers make a lot of money making really realistic illustrations of things that they could take a picture of. The reason they do that is because they want to be able to blow that olive up to 100 foot by 100 foot to advertise in New York City. But they also want the olive to be able to be shrunk down to put on an individual serving container of 6 olives that you sell at the food store. So just know that even the olives are actual digital illustrations of the olives themselves. Okay, so we've covered fills and strokes. We've covered selection arrows and direct select arrows. We covered bounding box that has scale and rotate. And we covered direct select, which allows you to select what are called the nodes, or the points where the shape changes direction, and we can manipulate them individually using the direct select tool. Now, we've done line segment and we've done basic shape. Those are the most simplest of forms as it relates to Illustrator. Now, I'm going to switch to the global selection arrow and keep this thing selected. Now, if I tap my mouse over here, away from the objects we've created, you notice nothing is highlighted. It isn't highlighted till I click on the object and it gives me the bounding box. Why is that important? Because if I click on properties and I don't have anything selected, this looks nothing like which would be in your book, which would show the properties of an object. But watch when I click on the rectangle or square we created, look how this changes. It changes to the X and Y coordinate, which means how far it is from the upper left-hand corner of our document. That's what's called 0, 0. So this little spot right up here is 0, 0. Once we create something in our artboard, it is, in this case, is 7.44 inches to the right and 2.5049 inches from the top. You never thought you would see geometry again, right? X and Y coordinates, but that's how the properties work in Illustrator. It's based on the upper left-hand corner of our document, which is called 0, 0. Okay, and you'll notice mine right now is 1.55556 inches wide and 2.5139639 inches tall. Now, this bounding box with it selected with the selection arrow is trying to show me what the maximum width and the maximum height of my object is. That's why it looks like this. You'll also notice that mine is rotated 45 degrees on the axis. Wow, that was a happy little accident. If I hold down shift, it changes in 15-degree increments. So if I held down shift, I would have went 0 degrees, 15, 30, 45, 60, 75, 90, and it would actually go in 15-minute increments. I did it manually and I just happened to stop it in 45 degrees. That's like nearly impossible. So I'm kind of applauding myself here on the back a little bit. That was a happy little accident. Now, you'll notice it has stroke and it has opacity. Now, opacity means the amount of color, the amount of light that you let shine through your object. And the stroke is the point total or the thickness of the line. So let's click the little up arrow here and make it thicker, right? So you're going to notice as I click, 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 it gets thicker and thicker and thicker. Now, you'll notice the opacity is 100%. We'll deal with opacity in a minute, but let's see what the stroke properties look like on the shape by going to the stroke palette. Now, when you choose the properties palette, it gives you just the thickness of the stroke. If you go to the stroke palette, which is right here, and if yours isn't open, you can go to window and scroll down and choose stroke. So if yours isn't open, you can always go to the window drop down. But you're going to notice that the stroke palette actually has far more properties. One of them is where it is as it relates to the box or the shape. So you'll notice right here, the stroke is aligned in the center. So you see how it's the same thickness on the left as it is on the right side of the center line of our shape. Well, watch what happens if I click stroke on the inside. Well, you actually can't see the fill anymore because my stroke is so thick that it basically fills the entire inside of the shape. Well, watch if I do outside. You'll notice that the entire stroke is on the outside of the shape. That's an interesting property to understand because if you're drawing an illustration, you probably don't want the stroke on the inside, because if you want a thick stroke around your shape, you're not going to be able to see the color on the inside of it, because if the stroke is too thick, it's going to eat up the entire inside. Most people that draw in Illustrator either use outside, which means it gives you the maximum amount of color on the inside of your shape, or they do middle, because that's the most natural outline of the shape, is to have it middle centered. Now, you're going to notice that lines have what are called caps. So like on our line segment, it actually cuts off right on the end of that line. I could actually round the end of the line if I wanted to. So if I zoom in really close on my line segment and I select my line segment, you see how it is a butt end? Watch if I click round. So I click on the round and I deselect. See how it's rounded now? Rounded is a more natural end cap to a line drawn with the line segment because it looks like a Bic pen. Like if you drag your Bic pen and you let it go at the end of your line, it's going to have a little ball on the end of it like that. I like to use rounded end cap on any lines I draw on my digital illustrations. Even if I make this line thicker, see how I make it thicker? Click up, 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 up. See how it's nice and rounded on the end of it? It looks like a natural curve on the end of our line. So I like to default it to round cap and either outside stroke or middle stroke. I never use inside stroke because if I'm drawing a shape in Illustrator, more times than not, I want to color inside of it. If I want to color inside of it, I need the stroke to be on the outside of the shape, or I need the stroke to be on the middle of the shape. So I'm just doing Command minus to zoom back out, Command plus to zoom in. Okay. Now I'm going to select my rectangle again, because there's one attribute to a stroke that's important. So we see how its alignment is to the middle, the outside, or the inside of the line. We know that the line segments that aren't full shapes, which means they're just lines, have what are called end caps. But when you have a full shape, you have what are called corner radiuses. Now, you'll notice that my line is really thick and it has this jagged point at the end. The reason it has a jagged point at the end is because it's set to the miter corner or sharp corner. Watch what happens when I choose round joint. I don't know if you've ever used woodwork before and you used a miter tool before in order to bevel something, but watch round. See how that jagged edge of my node becomes rounded. This actually is more natural than the miter joint. See how that's a sharp triangular shape and this is rounded? So for me, when I'm drawing in Illustrator, drawing a logo, creating an illustration, making a symbol for someone, creating an illustrated graphic that might be a wayfinding graphic, I do a couple of presets for my strokes. One is I do a rounded cap, I do a rounded corner, and I do an alignment of either outside the shape or middle or center of the shape. So look at how much more natural this looks with a rounded cap, a rounded end cap, a rounded corner joint, and a stroke outside. This is like really a beautiful shape created in Illustrator. And when you go to food store this week to go shopping, go down the cereal aisle and look at all the illustrations on the cereal boxes. Notice what the line looks like. Is it a rounded corner in the shapes of the illustration? Does it look like the stroke for the shapes is on the outside of the shapes or the middle of the shapes? You can learn a lot at the food store. I actually am addicted to like gourmet food stores like Fresh Market and Sprouts, because you're going to get beautiful labels from some of the more organic or high-end products. And when you look at the illustrations, they're really beautiful and spectacular. I used to collect them in my office and I just had stacks of boxes pinned to the walls and all kinds of stuff. And then Hodges came and said, you know, that's a fire hazard, right? You got 35 cereal boxes tacked to your wall. And if we had a fire, your office is going up like a blaze of glory because you have all that cardboard tacked to your wall. So I've removed it all and now it's at home in my home office. So if it catches fire there, it burns my regular house down, not the office at Hodges. So, but I love to collect and look at. I don't know if you like music, but look at all the illustrations for bands on Spotify. We don't do CDs anymore. Some still do vinyl. I actually like to listen to actual records, so I collect vinyl. But take a look at even Spotify or any streaming music you use. If you click on an album cover, Avett Brothers, I don't know who you listen to, you're going to see some beautiful illustrations. And that's all created in a vector world like Illustrator, made really small for Spotify, but can be blown up really big for a t-shirt too, right? You can screen print that on a t-shirt the same way you can put it on an album cover. So just know that's the application of Illustrator. That's what we're trying to learn. So now let's look at the last properties of an object that we created in Illustrator. Let's go over to our fill. So let's make sure our rectangle is selected. Let's go over to our fill shape, right? So I selected our fill shape. Let's add a color. I don't care what color. So add a blue, add a pink, add a purple, whatever. Don't add black because I want you to see that there's color inside of it. So add some color to your shape. Make sure it's selected with the global selection arrow. And then once you have your object selected, you added some stroke to it, you put some color on the inside of it. Let's go back to the properties tab. So I'm actually going to tuck away, hit the little double arrows and get rid of the color. And let's go to the properties tab. Now, when you go to the properties tab, I said, well, opacity means the amount of light you can see through your object. But you couldn't really see it because we didn't really have any color inside the shape. Now that we have color inside your shape and stroke around the edge of the shape, let's change the opacity of the shape, which some might know as transparency, the amount of light that shines through, right? Depending on the material. So I'm going to take the opacity, I'm going to drag it down to 50%. Now, you're going to quickly notice that the shape, you can now see the drawing through. You can actually see Ben 10 through this shape, right? You can see color through the shape. Well, why is that important? Why is opacity important? Well, opacity is important because this illustration has brown hair with a light brown highlight. Do you know this light brown highlight is a white shape with like 33% opacity? If it's a white shape with 33% opacity, it's like taking the dark brown and mixing a little white in the dark brown to change what we call the tint of the color. So this is actually a white shape at probably 20%, somewhere in the 20 to 30% range, in order to make the dark brown light brown. That's not a light brown shape. That's a white shape with opacity. So think about shapes on top of shapes. If you create one shape and put a shape on top of it, change the color of the shape and change the opacity, you can do what's called color shift or tint the shapes you're drawing. The more layers on top of layers or objects on top of objects with different colors and different tints, the more complex the shape. So an apple with a shine on it has a gradient red color with multiple shapes of white on top of it. Those whites have multiple levels of opacities, and that's how you make something shimmer, gleam, shine that normally you wouldn't know how to do. Now, with that being said, next week we're going to see what effects do to objects, and there are what we consider Photoshop effects or raster-based effects inside of Illustrator to better enhance 3D shapes in a 2D world. So next week, we will look at some more advanced techniques for making things more complicated in Illustrator. But we're just doing basic shapes now so we can see how Illustrator functions. It shapes with fills and strokes. Those fills and strokes are scalable. Each one of those has both a color inside and a color on the edge. Based on how thick the color on the edge is how you make the shape a defined shape, and each shape can have a level of opacity. And when I create a shape, that shape ends up on top of the next shape. So you see how you can actually see this shape on top of that shape? Look how perfectly black it is there. But the minute I move that and put it on top of it, that area of the line becomes a purplish color because I have an opacity of 50% and this shape is on top of that shape. Now, why does that look like there's no object on top of it? That's because the stroke on both is black. So this doesn't affect that because gray on top of black with a 50% opacity still gets you black. So the only place it's affected is right here. Well, look at how different that makes that. Boy, that's an interesting relationship. Line behind that shape that changes. Now, every object you create stacks on top of itself. But let's say I wanted this line to be on top of this shape, right? And right now it isn't. So look, I can't even actually select that very easily. I can't get that line because the other line is on top of it, right? So I have a couple of options. I can either go to my layers palette. So let's go over to our layers palette and let's click the little triangle next to the art layer. And you're going to notice that each object I create becomes a sub object or sub layer. So if I click the little eyeball next to the shape I created, it disappears, right? There it is. If I click on this one, it disappears. So we have a couple of ways to select multiple things in a drawing. One way to do it is to lock the shape I don't want to select. So right over here, this box next to the eyeball on the path layer. Watch if I click on that. I can't select it. The only thing I can select is the line because I locked that shape. Now, for me, when I'm creating or drawing in Illustrator, when I create something and I have it exactly the way I want it, even if it's just the outline to start with, I'll lock it and draw the next thing. I actually lock my objects every time I create one and I'm done with that object so that I can create new things around it. It makes it easier because it doesn't cause me to select and move something that I don't want to select and move. And keep in mind, this illustration has lots of objects in it, right? The eyeball has the center circle, the eyeball, the dark highlight, the light highlight. So 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 4 shapes just on the eyeball in this illustration. If I was done drawing the pupil, I would lock it so I could draw the highlight on top of it. So best practice is when you draw something, go back to the selection arrow once you draw it. The next best practice is once you draw it the way you want it, lock it so that it doesn't move. You can always unlock it and go back and move it or add attributes or change the thickness or adjust the color. But best practice is to kind of lock that thing and draw on to the next thing and then unlock it as you need to. So if I was drawing this hair, I would draw the outline of the hair, lock the hair, and then draw the outline to the highlight of the hair, just so that I'm not, because these two shapes touch, right? The highlight of the hair touches the edge of the hair. So I want to draw that outside shape first and then lock it and draw the inside shape in essence. For me, that's best practice. That way I'm not touching the shapes as I'm drawing them. So that's best practice number one. Now, if I need to move the order of these objects, so let's say I wanted this line to be on top of this shape, but I drew the line first because I was most comfortable with that. I wasn't thinking about drawing things in order from background to foreground. You can either drag it over here, or you can right click it. Now I'm a right clicker. So if I right click on this shape, I can do what's called arrange, bring to front, or send to back. So for me, if I want that shape to be behind the line segment, I'm going to do send to back. And now you'll notice that this line is in front of this shape. Right click, send to back. So, oh yeah, I put that line there and I kind of wish that line was behind the shape. I'm just going to use my selection arrow, right click on the line and do arrange, send to back, and it will go behind the shape. Send it back, bring the front, send it back, bring the front. And you can move things around inside of your drawing layer. Send it back, bring the front, send it back, bring the front. Okay. Selection arrow, direct select arrow, fills and strokes, bounding box and nodes. This is everything in chapter 1 of your book. I'm just going over the terminology and showing you the functional application of it. Now, here's where we throw a wrench in the system. The wrench in the system is the pen tool. If there's one tool in all of Adobe that you should practice and try to get as good as you possibly can get at it, it's the pen tool. The pen tool is for drawing shapes. The pen tool is for creating selections in Photoshop. The pen tool is used for a bunch of things. So let's move over now and select the pen tool. Now, your chapter 1 has you tracing all kinds of little shapes, little flames, little heads, little skulls, little flowers, all of these little shapes. It provides you with the art file. It's a template. You just trace over the top of it. We're going to import our own photograph like we did here and trace over the top of it. If you prefer for chapter 1 to go get a picture of something that you love and use the pen tool and trace over the top of it, I'm okay with it. So just know that. I know I repeat it over and over again, but not everyone is as inspired by the illustrations the book provides. Sometimes they want to create their own inspiration. Maybe they have a little kid and they love SpongeBob and they want to draw SpongeBob as a vector graphic so that they can upload it to Custom Ink and make t-shirts of SpongeBob for their kids. Well, Custom Ink needs an Illustrator file or a vector file to create the screen print that they put on the t-shirt that they then mail to you. So sometimes people have personal agendas where they want to learn to draw things that they want to make things later from. So, okay. Now, the pen tool is simple in nature, but complicated to use at times. So I'm going to show you. So let's zoom in a little bit. So Command plus, zoom in a little bit. Let's hold the space bar down. We have the pen tool selected, but if you hold the space bar down, it turns into a hand. Let's move the artboard so that we can see the hand right here, because we're going to trace this hand using the pen tool. Rectangles are easy. Circles are easy. Line segments are easy. Painting with the paintbrush is as easy as your hand can move the mouse. The pen tool, not as easy. Now, I want you to know that I'm left-handed. I do absolutely everything in my life left-handed. except drawing with the mouse. I draw with the mouse with my right hand. Well, Chip, why do you draw with the mouse with your right hand when you're completely 100% left hand dominant? Because when I was in school, the cord attached to the mouse didn't reach the left-hand side of the computer. It only reached the right-hand side of the computer. So it's kind of like the olden days when maybe you were in Catholic school and they would smack you with a ruler if you used the wrong hand to write. Well, I had no other option but to learn to draw with my right hand because the mouse didn't reach the left-hand side when I learned to draw. There was no wireless mouses. Everything was connected by a cord. The only thing I could do was draw with my right hand. If I can draw with my right hand, you can draw with your natural hand. I literally can't do a thing right-handed except draw with the mouse. It's practice, okay? It's practice. So just keep in mind, you can draw over and over again. You can edit, undo over and over again. So now let's take a look at how the pen tool works. This is your entire chapter 1. Now, before we actually draw, make sure there is a fill of none and a stroke of black. Fill of none and a stroke of black. And let's go over to our stroke palette and make sure our stroke isn't enormously thick. So let's go with like a stroke of 3, right? So we're gonna no fill, black stroke, stroke of 3. Now, the reason we're doing no fill is because we're gonna trace this hand. The reason we're doing no fill, because as we make the shape, we don't want the fill to start covering up the image we're trying to trace. If there was a fill, it would start covering up the image. So we only have a stroke. And the reason I made the stroke a little bit thinner is so that it's like drawing with a pencil over the image. It doesn't cover up the whole image while you're trying to trace this thing. Now, let's take our mouse right down to the bottom left-hand side of this hand, right where the hand touches the watch that he has on his wrist. So right down where the hand touches the watch that he has on his hand. Now, the first thing we're going to do is take our mouse and just click it once and let go. Click it once and let go. Now, you're going to notice that it puts a node down. Now, look at my mouse. As I move my mouse, but I'm not clicking it, it's giving me what's called a directional guide. So you see this directional guide? It's showing me where would you like this line to go. Now, the line has 2 possible attributes. The first is if we just click our mouse and let go, it draws a straight line. So instead of trying to curve around this hand, we're just going to draw a series of straight lines. So watch my mouse. I'm just going to click, let go, click, let go, click, let go, and let's go around the edge of this hand. Click, let go, click, let go. And we're going to go right around the edge of this hand. We're not clicking and dragging at all. We're just click, let go, click, let go, click, let go. And I want you to go all the way around the hand and go back to the point where we started. So you'll notice I'm click, let go, click, let go. And you could do this shape in 100 nodes, or you could do the shape in far less. Now, you'll notice when I get all the way back around to the very first node that my pen tool actually has a circle underneath the symbol of the pen tool. The circle underneath the symbol of the pen tool, when I get back to node number 1, the first node I put down, is Illustrator asking me if I want to close the shape. Is a rectangle a closed shape? Yes. Is a circle a closed shape? Yes. Is a triangle a closed shape? Yes. Is a star a closed shape? Yes. Is an ellipse a closed shape? Yes. When drawing in Illustrator, you're going to notice that it is a bunch of closed shapes. Even if there isn't a stroke on the shape and there's only a fill color, it is a closed shape. You see that little white eyeball here? You notice how there isn't a stroke on it? It's still a closed shape. It just doesn't have a stroke on it. So I'm going to go back to the first dot, get the little circle, and click. Now, once that happens, it means you have made a solid shape. So now remember, best practice. Now that I have my closed shape created, let's go back to our global selection arrow. And you're going to notice my hand now has a bounding box around it. My hand has a bounding box around it. The bounding box is now like, hey, you created a closed shape on the hand. Would you like to maybe add some color to it? So let's click on our little fill, and we can either double click on it here and add some color to it. Or we can go over to our little color palette and add some color to it. Or we can go to our swatches palette and add some color to it. And we have, in essence, created a closed shape of our hand, which is exactly what the illustration is on Ben 10. That's a closed shape of his hand. Now, well, Chip, I can't see the rest of the drawing because I put color inside of it. Remember, best practice when I'm drawing is to not have color on it, so I can create all of the things I need to create in my illustration. So if I wanted to add these two little lines right here to the details of his hand, I don't want to have fill inside the shape because I can't see these two little lines yet. I can't see them yet because I have fill inside of my shape. So I don't want to do that yet if I'm going to do the detail of his hand. But I also want a smoother hand. Can I use direct select and manipulate these nodes to make the hand a little better? Maybe, right? Maybe. The problem is my illustration is curved lines and not straight lines. Now, lots of illustrators create drawings with straight lines. That's actually a style of illustration, is to create all your drawings with a bunch of straight lines. It's a modern style or modern approach to drawing. In this case, we want some curved lines. We don't want all straight lines. So I'm going to use my selection arrow, click on the shape we created, and hit delete. I'm going to get rid of that line because I want to draw a curved line with my pen tool, not a straight line. And this is where practice is critical in learning the basics of drawing a straight line or drawing a digital line, is the pen tool and what's called a Bezier curve, which is how the pen tool curves lines. So we're going to start with little small curves, and then we'll expand to some little bit bigger curves. So let's use our pen tool again. No fill with a black stroke, and let's put our little node point to start our line. So we're going to click and let go. Now, you'll notice that this line is curved. Look how nicely curved that hand is, part of the back side of the fist. Now, let's move about halfway up the curve. So you kind of see right about here, kind of like halfway up the line. I'm going to click and hold my mouse down and drag up. Now, you see when I click and hold my mouse down and drag up, I start to create a curved line. Now, you're going to notice the white dot in the middle. That's my node. As I pull away from my node, I have a forward directional anchor. So you see the line and the dot that goes forward in the white node? That is my forward directional anchor. That controls where the next line curves. Now, the back directional anchor, which is the line with the red dot below my node, is the curve of the line I'm drawing. So you see, as I drag that, the curve changes direction of the line I'm trying to draw. So let's try to pull this anchor and make this line curve just like the hand. So watch when I curve it and let go. Does the line continue up here with that pull and drag? No, the line is only to the center node. So you see that curve? This back directional anchor is the line we've drawn. But watch as I move my mouse past the node. See how it's starting to curve for the new line? So you can see it right there. The new line is controlled by this directional anchor, the one moving forward. So the way I teach students is, watch when I go back to my node. You see that little V that forms, that little inverted V symbol that's below my pen icon? You can see it right there. What that little V is asking is, do I want to remove the forward directional anchor? So watch what happens if I click one time on the center node. The forward anchor goes away. So what does that mean? Look, I can draw a straight line again. I am not tied to the forward directional anchor. Well, why is that important? As you're learning the pen tool, sometimes it's easier only to deal with the directional anchor of the line you're drawing, which is the bottom directional anchor. So watch if I move my mouse now up to the knuckle and click, hold the mouse down and drag up. So you see, as I drag up, I'm curving the next line. Now watch when I let go. Well, look here. You see how I can't curve it to the right shape of the hand? It's too high. If I click my mouse now, it's curved too far. But watch if I go back to my center node and click one time. Look how I can now follow this line. So watch, click, pull, go back to the center node, click once. Click, pull, go back to the center node, click once. Click, pull, go back to the center node, click once. Look how easy it is. Click, pull, go back to the center node, click once. Go to this knuckle, click, pull, go back to the center node and click once. So instead of, so I'm going to go around this hand by removing the forward directional anchor. So I'm only clicking and dragging to curve the line that I'm currently drawing. So watch how easy it is. Remove, go to the next one, click, drag, go back to the middle, remove, click, drag, go back to the middle, click once, remove. Go here, click, drag, go back to the middle node, remove. And I'm going to every spot the line curves, click and drag, go back to the middle, remove. This one's actually straight. Click there. Click move, curve it, go back to the middle node, remove. Click for the straight line. Click curve, let go. And look how easy it is to draw curves when you're removing the forward direction from every line you create. Now, when I select this, look how beautifully curved that shape is around that knuckle. Now, I'm going to delete that to show you how the forward directional anchors work. Now, the difference is going to be, you see how the lines flatten out when I move the forward directional anchor. So it actually curves to there, and then it starts going straight before it curves. And then I remove the forward anchor, so it is flat here before it starts to curve again. There actually isn't a perfectly curved direction. See how it's straight and then it wiggles, and then it's straight and then it wiggles, and then it's straight and then it wiggles. You can actually see that it's a little jaggedy, even though it does curve pretty well around that hand. The reason it's a little jaggedy is because I removed the forward direction. Now, take a look at the pen tool when I don't remove the forward direction. So I'm going to click my mouse once and let go. I'm going to move halfway up this hand and click and pull. Now, instead of removing the forward direction, watch how I click and drag. Now, the reason I can do this pretty well is because I am thinking about the direction the next part of the line is going to curve. So I'm going to actually stop right there just so that you can see the difference. Now, watch when I click away. You see how this is seamlessly smooth as it curves, and there isn't a straight buckle to each of the points? It's because I didn't remove the forward directional anchor. But the challenge with the pen tool is knowing how far Now watch what happens. If I try to do this entire hand, watch. There's no way to curve this. So watch, if I click here and I bend to try to match that. Well, look at the next one. If I try to bend and match that, you see how it's the further the forward directional anchor goes from the node, the bigger the next line is going to start curving. So that means when I'm drawing a long curved line like this, I need to go about halfway and curve it so that my next line, see how it already follows the curve already? So my next line, if I click and drag it, you see how my next line, so if I go to here and click and drag it, so I'm actually trying to make the anchor, so if I zoom in, I'm trying to make the forward directional anchor follow the line that needs to be drawn. So you see how that anchor follows the line? So watch, if I want to do this, I click and drag it along the line. Now when I get to here, that's a point where it changes direction. So you see how if I want to curve that knuckle, if I go halfway and pull, see how I'm moving that directional anchor to follow the line I'm trying to follow? So when I go to here, it already curves. So the trick with, and I used to give this as a challenge for the students, but then it started driving them crazy. I would give them the outline of a rabbit and I'd say, okay, for homework, trace the rabbit. And whoever uses the least amount of pen points to trace the rabbit will win an award, will win an extra 10 points on their project. And students would be like, I did it in 7 points. And the next student would be, I did it in 6 points. And they keep trying to get lower and lower number of nodes or little points to draw the rabbit. The key is to draw the shape in the least number of points, but with the smoothest stroke. So what does that mean? That means practicing the pen tool on each shape many times to get comfortable with the curve. Is it wrong to remove the forward directional anchor? No, lots of designers do this. Remove it, go to the next, remove it, go to the next, remove it, go to the next, remove it, go to the next. But you'll notice right here, it straightens out before it curves again. That's the difference. You see how this straightens out or buckles before it curves again? The reason it buckles is because I removed the forward direction angle. When you zoom out to there, can you tell that that line doesn't have perfect forward directional anchors? No. So if this illustration was made the size of a stamp, you would never notice it. But if I zoom in, you see the straight buckle now? Yes, there was no forward directional anchor, so this buckles. So best practice is to practice the pen tool with forward directional anchors. And that's actually chapter 1 in your book, just drawing over top of the little illustration they give you over and over and over again to learn the forward directional anchor technique so that your line is smooth. And I can tell you right now, when you make it this big, you'll never notice. And when you make it this big, you will notice. But if you ever walk around the Hodges campus, the hawk that is our logo was created in-house, beautifully done, very nice drawing from one of our graphic designers. But if you look really closely to part of the head, there's this. He removed the forward directional anchor and started curving the next line. And there is a weird buckle right here. Does that weird buckle noticeable on the 3D hawk on the front of the building? No, because when they bent the metal, they smoothed that out a little bit. Can you see it on the vinyl sticker they put in the waiting areas, kind of the collection areas in the halls, and they're really big. They're like 8 foot by 8 foot. Yeah, if you look at it, it actually has a buckle in the line. It is not perfectly smooth. If I drew that, it would drive me crazy. I have illustrations literally all over the globe. Some of them, won big awards, won international awards. I'm very proud of them. But when I look at them, sometimes I'm like, I could have done that a little bit better. Why did I buckle that line? Why is that line not perfectly smooth? I should have made that shape yellow, not blue, right? There's no such thing as perfection. You're always trying to get better. Don't kill yourself over perfection. As you practice, you will get better. I've been doing it a long time, and I still look at my line quality every once in a while, and I nitpick little nuances of things I think could have been better. Now, your chapter 1 in your book is just practicing the pen tool, drawing shapes and adding fills and strokes to them. Now, let's try that by making our own template, because some of you, for homework for chapter number 1, you're going to want to create your own template and just draw all over the top of it. Some of you will download chapter number 1 zip file from the Start Here folder and trace over top of the little weird face they give you for the chapter assignment, but you can also do it this way if you like. So let's go out to Chrome or Internet Explorer or whatever software browser you use. And I'm just going to open up a new window, so I'm not using my window for my class, and I'm going to minimize that. So now you know that you can go to Google and you could search for just about whatever you want, right? So your out of book project is either the hot dog illustration or a mascot. So let's trace a mascot. So let's just do the beginning of our out of book project, because you could do your out of book project, pen tool and Pathfinder tool, all in your out of book mascot and submit it for chapter 1, chapter 2, and out of book. You can actually do all 3 projects for learning module 1, doing one out of book project. But just know that chapter 1's the pen tool. You need to read and practice the pen tool. Chapter 2 is the Pathfinder tool that I'm going to show you now. You need to read and practice the pen tool. If those 2 skills are reflected in your tracing of your mascot or your hot dog illustration, I'm okay with that. So just know that the project chapter files are in Start Here, and the projects in your chapter are these 2 skills. You can do them step by step, or you can do them out of book. The key is practicing the pen tool and practicing the Pathfinder tool so that you're able to create your mascot using those 2 techniques. That's the outcome we're trying to meet for learning module 1. Okay, so let's do Baltimore Orioles mascot, right? I was saying I'm from Baltimore, and so Baltimore Orioles mascot is like my thing, right? The Orioles are my team. So you're going to notice here is the mascot, right? In all of his glory. And if you Google search it, I mean, look at all the little illustrations, the logo. I mean, he's the little batted bird here. There are tons of really cool mascots. I'm going to do mascot logo because our out of book project is a mascot, right? And you're going to notice he's the bird. He's this little dude. He's the swinging bird. And so let me just say, oh, he's the more natural looking bird, right? These are all mascots. I actually really like this little swinging bird mascot. That's the thing I probably would draw for my out of book project if I was. Look at all the different interpretations. Here's the vintage. This was actually the old classic bird logo that they remodernized. That used to be from the history long time ago, right? It was a Negro League team, and then it became the Orioles, and then the Orioles had all these versions of their mascot. And keep in mind, a mascot doesn't have to be a sports mascot. There's mascots for everything, right? Most stores have a symbol or a mascot. So if this isn't your thing, but you have a pet and you like PetSmart and you want to trace the dog in the PetSmart logo, I'm okay with that too. So I just want you to practice the pen tool and the Pathfinder tool. Okay, so I need this swinging bird guy. Now, I don't know if you know this, but when you do an image search in Google, you can go to the Tools tab and pick large image. The reason I'm picking large image is because I want to have the biggest picture I can to try to trace my mascot. So I picked large image. So you're going to see all the birds, the photos of the birds. Look at this old classic mascot. Here's the swinging one. Well, I want the swinging one, right? This is the symbol I want. So I'm going to click on this image, and here he is right here, 900 by 900. So now, if you've ever done a search in Google for an image, you can do one of 2 things. You can click and drag the image and take it from your image search. You can right click on it and do save image as, and some students do, in essence, the print screen button on their Mac or their PC and do a screen capture of this. So you can right click on it, do save image as. You can click and drag and drop it on your desktop, or you can hit your print screen button on your PC, or in Mac world, it's Command Shift and the number 4. And you'll notice I can actually draw a screenshot of that image. So you can save it, you can screenshot it, or you can drag and drop it. However you get pictures off of your Google search to your computer, because you need this picture in order to place it in Illustrator. So you need a JPEG, a PNG, something like that. So click and drag, right click, save image, whatever works for you to get your mascot image that you're going to use to draw over the top of. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize my browser, and I'm going to go into Illustrator, and I'm going to do File, New. File, New. And the reason I'm doing File, New is because I'm going to create the same template I created for Ben 10 for my mascot, just so that we're kind of on the same page. Remember, I'm recording this, so you can go back and watch this over and over again if you need to. So I'm going to do File, New, and I'm just going to do a letter piece of paper. It's a 8.5 by 11. It's what you put in your printer at home, your HP, your Epson, whatever. 8.5 by 11, standard piece of paper. And I'm going to click Create. And you're going to notice it's right here, right? So if I go to Properties, here's my artboard. It's right here. If I click on Edit Artboard, it's right here. If I want it Portrait or I want it Landscape, it's right there in the Properties, right? So here it is. I just happen to do Landscape because that was what the default was. Now I'm going to do exactly what I did with Ben 10. So I saved the image to the desktop and I made a new document. Here's my artboard. I'm going to do File, Place, and I'm going to place the image I got from the internet. So I'm going to go there. I'm going to click on my thumbnail. Now you're going to notice that it says Template, Show Import Options, and Link. If you click the link button, it means you always have to have thumb.jpg. Well, when I learned almost 30 years ago with Illustrator, everything was linked because you wanted to keep the files really small. Remember, if it's linked and this image exists by itself, then it doesn't need a copy of the image in Illustrator. If you don't link it, it means the image is embedded in Illustrator. So do I need thumbnail.jpg if it's embedded in Illustrator? No, all I need is the Illustrator file. I can actually trash thumb.jpg, delete thumb.jpg once I put it in Illustrator, as long as this link button is not checked. Now, if I do template, it's going to automatically ghost the image in the background for me. I'm actually not going to click template because I'm going to make the template. So I show you what this does as a process, but I'm going to do it manually. So no check to the link box, select it and click place. Now look at this. This little thumbnail is saying, hey, where do you want to put this thing? So if I tap my mouse, it just places it in my document. If I do File, Place, and I pick my thumbnail and I don't lick it and I click Place, watch if I click and drag a selection box. If I click and drag it to fit the document and let go, it makes it the perfect size of the document. That's best practice. Could I File, Place, click on the thumbnail, click it, drop it. Look how big it is. See this big bounding box here? I could grab the corner and hold down Shift and make it smaller, but look what I have to do. And the reason I'm holding Shift is to make sure I scale it proportionately. If I don't hold down Shift, look what happens, right? It makes it distorted. So remember when I said hold down Shift to scale proportionally? When you're dealing with images in Illustrator, you always want to hold down Shift. But look how much easier this is. File, Place, grab the thumbnail, start at the top of my document, pretty much just drag to the bottom of my document, let go, and it puts it perfectly inside of my page. Now, here it is. But look, it's not ghosted. It's not a way that I can easily draw over the top of it. Remember properties? Remember opacity? Watch if I crank this down. I can make it super soft. So I can draw over the top of it. So I'm going to do about 30% or so. That's a pretty good place to be, 30%, right? That's 30% opacity. But watch, and I'm just going to show you real quickly. See how I can see my line over the top of it because I made it lighter, like a watermark? So making it a watermark or changing the opacity, making it lighter, makes it easier to draw over top of a photograph. So whether it's a photo of a lion, an illustration, whatever it is, if you place it and set it back or change the opacity to like 30%, you can draw over the top of it. Now, the last step to using something to draw over top of it is to go to our layers palette. So you see how there's only one layer and it's the bird. I'm going to rename this layer by double clicking it and calling it bird logo and hit enter. Bird logo. Can I still select it? Yeah, but watch, I can lock it. Now I can't select it, right? And I can do what's called add a new layer. So I'm going to click a new layer and I'm going to rename it art layer. So now look. And this is just a paintbrush tool. So see how I can draw right over the top of it? Can I select them and delete them? Yep. Draw again. Select the line, delete it. So I created the mascot template by using a photograph, doing file place, making sure the link box isn't selected, draw the box to place the object to the size of my artboard, select that image and make the opacity lighter, create a new layer and lock the opacity layer. So now watch what happens. Zoom, zoom, zoom. So now I'm ready to start tracing my bird. And I actually would trace. The beauty about mascots is look at the shapes. You already see the orange shape. You see the white shape. You see the little line segments here. You see everything you need to draw for this thing in its own unique little shape. So now, last part of the process. Let's draw the little knob for our mascot, just so that we can practice kind of drawing with the pen tool. So I'm going to switch to the pen tool. I'm going to have no fill and a stroke of black. And this is just practice. You can do this at home over and over again. And I said, well, your homework probably would be 6, 7, 8 hours roughly in that window. Even if you just draw your mascot for chapter 1 and chapter 2 and you're out of the book, it'll probably take 6, 7, 8, maybe 10 hours practicing the pen tool, even to just trace this. Even if you did this just over and over and over again, and you didn't even do a Bezier curve or anything. Look at how bad that is. Delete, delete. Let me zoom in a little closer. Click, click, click. Even if I do just straight lines, right? I don't want you to do just straight lines, but if you're practicing and you're just trying to get the basic shape of this thing, look at this. And I'm just going to click and look if I get closer. Look how good I can get with the straight lines if I'm really close. And you see the little squares of color of the image? Those are the pixels. So watch when I zoom in. See those? Those are the pixels. So if I zoom in really close, I could follow just the dark gray pixels. See those pixels? I could just follow those and trace right around this bat. And so let me zoom out. Is that bat really terrible? Zoomed out, you can't really tell. That looks pretty smooth around that bat. Well, watch when we zoom in. Uh-oh. Bat no looks so good right here, right? I really need to curve that bat in order to make it smooth. And this is the practice. And your book describes this very well over and over again, how to make the Bezier curve. So your homework this week is really to practice the pen tool, read the first 2 chapters in your book, and to practice the pen tool good enough to create the little outline and color of your mascot or your hot dog illustration of choice. So now look at that. Zoom out. It actually looks the same as the dot, 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 no curves. But when you zoom in, it's much better. And I could even do a better job than that. I just did it quickly for the demonstration. Now, I draw everything as an outline before I fill the color in. So you see how this line touches the hand of the bird? So you see, you can actually see the shape here. So see how it goes? And this is a complicated shape, actually. It goes all the way to his knee. So if I was doing this as my practice, I would lock the bat, and now I would start the hand. So I would start here and start curving and start curving and start curving. And I'm going to go quick just to show the outline of this mascot. So you get the basic idea of this. And so see how I'm working my way around? And if I deselect, now you would never know that this bat knob is a shape and that the hand is the beginning of the next shape. And I'm just drawing around this thing, pen tool, shape tool. Now, the last little piece of the puzzle for your homework, which is chapter 2 of your book, is what is called the Pathfinder tool. And you see how these white eyes have this black circle, which is the pupil of the eyes. Well, the pupil of the eyes actually aren't black circles. They're a cutout of this shape. So this shape is cut out of the eyes. So I'm going to show you how that works. And this is chapter 2 in your book. I'm going to take my pen tool and I'm going to do this very quickly just so you get a gist of the shape. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to create, in essence, this shape. So you see how this, his eyes are actually like this. His eyes are actually like that, with this little shape cut out and this little shape cut out. So the eyes are actually cut out of this white shape. So you see how I made that shape? And watch this. If I make it white and I remove the outline, in essence, that's his eyes. And you can see it right there. So if I hide that for a second, this is his eyes. But the problem is his eyes have this little pupil right here. So watch what happens if I take my ellipse or circle tool and I draw a shape for that. You see that little shape? And I'm actually going to make it black just so that you can see it. I'm going to make this black and I'm going to turn back on. So you see that. So this is the white of his eye, and I'm actually going to remove the stroke so it's only the outline. And this is the pupil. But you see right here, that's actually removed from the logo. You see how that's cut flat right there? It's cut flat right there. It's done by what's called the Pathfinder tool. So when you have a shape on top of another shape, so you see how the black circle is on top of the white shape? Watch what happens if I select this and I hold down Shift and select that. See how they're both selected? I can actually draw a selection box too. And I select both objects. I'm going to do Window Pathfinder tool, and you're going to see this when you read your chapter. So you see this circle and this shape. This is on top of this. If I click Subtract, minus from front, watch what happens. It cuts the pupil out of that shape. So this now has that cut out. Well, why is that important? Well, it's important because, and I'm going to do this very quickly just so you get the gist. I'm actually not even going to hide everything. I'm just going to draw the basics so you get the idea. So let's do, I'm going to minimize that. Let's go in and make this black. I'm going to make that black. And I'm going to send this behind the eyes. So I'm going to send it behind the eyes. So you see how that is cut out now? The actual black part of his face. So I'm going to hide this and hide this and hide that. You see this this head with his hair and under the brim of his hat is all one shape. And his eyeballs are a shape minus the pupils. So minus the pupils. So that isn't its own circle. It's cut out of the other shape. So how does that work? Well, watch if I just do a rectangle, draw a rectangle, draw another rectangle. So you see if I select both of these rectangles and I do minus, see how it cuts a hole out of that? The Pathfinder tool cuts a hole out of the object on top of the other object. So look at this. So you can see the image behind it. I cut a hole out of that. So these eyeballs are cut out of the pupils. So that is a circle cut out of this shape. So when I'm drawing the shape, I can actually go all the way over here to trace around it. I can go into this space. Does it matter? It doesn't matter, because when I cut the shape out, it removes the flat part of this shape. See that flat part right there? So I can actually take this and I'm just going to curve it a little bit so you can see it. And I'm going to make this white. I'm not even going to use the image. I'm not going to use the image because I can't see it with the shapes drawn over it. Let me just draw a circle over here. I'm just going to freehand it because, so if that was an eyeball and this was an eyeball, and now if I turn that back on, see how that's cut out of there? That is the Pathfinder tool. So you see how that's cut out of itself? Think about it like the O. See the shape inside of the O? This is a circle or an ellipse with a circle inside of it. If I draw a circle, and watch me do it, I'll even just do it for the O, even though I know that the O is a typeface. So watch if I draw this. And I'm going to rotate it and put it here, right? So there's the O. I can stretch it out a little bit. So if I want to draw this letter manually, I could. And then watch, I'm going to draw the circle inside of it. So there it is. And watch if I select that circle and do the minus. So watch now. So let's make this, I don't know, let's make it a black or something, purple. So you see that? That's the Pathfinder tool. This circle is cut out of this circle, created into one shape with a transparency in the middle. So when you're drawing your mascot, you might need to cut the pupil out of the eyeballs. That's what the Pathfinder tool is for. It cuts shapes out of shapes. And that's chapter 2 in your book, cutting shapes out of shapes. So the shape on top cuts out the shape underneath. And that is how you create these complex shapes. So you see this? See this weird little shape right here? This shape could be, watch, curve, 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 curve. And I'm just going to close this shape. So I'm just going to close it so you can see it. And then I'm going to draw a shape on top of it. And now watch, select that shape, minus. It cut that little shape out of it. So it makes little symbols like that a lot easier to create. Look how I cut that triangle out of that shape. So areas that have areas of void inside of your illustration can be done by Pathfinder tool, cutting the shape out. It's a really important step in drawing because there's always going to be a shape you got to cut a shape out of. You can also unify and divide. There's other Pathfinder tools. The most important one is subtract. Next week, I'm going to show you unite because we're going to make a graffiti or bubble effect using the unite tool. So, okay, so we're at, well, I went a little over in my lecture and that happens because it's week 1. So I'm going to stop my drawing now and I'm going to save it, file, save as, and I'm going to name it my last name _ mascot.ai. And I'm going to put it in my digital illustration learning module 1 folder. And so now I've started my out of book project for week 1, which is drawing over or creating a mascot, or you can do a hot dog illustration, or you could do Savannah Bananas if you want. I don't know if you ever heard of Savannah Bananas, but it's a minor league team in Savannah and they do really funny games. I don't know if you've never TikTok or YouTube, I don't know what you use, but they put a guy on first base that's in stilts and it's like 20-foot high stilts and he tries to play first base and they try to do all kinds of weird things during the baseball game. Their mascot's a banana. So it's kind of a funny mascot. It's a banana playing baseball. So maybe that's something you would like to do, but okay. So you'll notice my file now. This is really important in file management. You should have a folder on your thumb drive or your computer called digital illustration. And inside that folder should be learning module or LM1. And inside of there is where you're going to save a minimum of 1 file, your mascot with your last name. If you read chapter 1 and chapter 1 and you draw, or chapter 2, and you draw your mascot with both the pen tool and the Pathfinder tool, you can use your mascot and submit it for all 3 projects. If you don't feel comfortable and you just want to trace step by step, like your chapter 1 in your book, and give me the chapter 1 file, and then for chapter 2, give me the chapter 2 file, and then trace your mascot for your out of book and give me the mascot file, you can do that. If you want to try to do the pen tool and the Pathfinder tool without the step-by-step, just reading the book and applying it to your mascot, whichever of those 2 ways you feel most comfortable with, you can do it to submit your 3 projects for week 1. Chapter 1, read the pen tool and practice. Chapter 2, the Pathfinder tool, draw and cut out shapes. And then your out of book, which is your mascot. Our goal is to have those 3 projects attempted at minimum for next Tuesday. Now, it's only a 4-week class, and I know the 4-week class goes pretty quick. I do not penalize you if you turn in assignments from week 1 and week 2, or the beginning of week 3. Just keep in mind that you don't want to not be practicing and doing each week because it snowballs really quickly. So do your very best to, at minimum, read chapter 1 in your book and read chapter 2 in your book and start your mascot project. That's minimum. Maximum is to read chapter 1 in your book, read chapter 2 in your book, and complete your mascot illustration. That's the max. Minimum is just try, but read your first 2 chapters. Max is to read the first 2 chapters and do your mascot. Remember, I'm addicted to technology. At any point in time, if you want to email, share a file with me, ask a question, you're practicing and you want to use the lab, if you're here locally, please, at any point in time, you can come in, you can email, we can Zoom. We have a week to do learning module 1, which is chapter 1 in your book, the pen tool, chapter 2 in your book, which is the Pathfinder tool, and our out of book project. So let's see what we can do this week. Get comfortable opening up your book as a PDF, reading your book, downloading the student files. Even if you just download the chapter 1 file and open an Illustrator and read the step-by-step, but don't actually touch the chapter 1 file, just read to see how it works and do it as your out of book, whatever works best for you. I'm trying to reach every learning type in the class, because we always have students with different learning types. But let's see what you can do week 1. And then Tuesday, when we get together, if I have a really stellar project from a student, I'll post it in the announcement section. I'll post some recordings and some videos in the announcement section, and we'll see how you do with Learning Module 1. Learning Module 2 is all about effects. So next week, we're going to do things like glows and drop shadows and textures. And we're going to start doing some more kind of what I would call intermediate drawing skills. But I also know it's a slow roll. So some students start out kind of struggling with the process at first. And by the time they get to week 2, week 3, they really start getting more comfortable in Illustrator. So don't really beat yourself up as you're starting the learning process, because you're going to get better. Just stick with it, and we're going to start drawing, and you're going to learn. You might end up at the end of the class saying, I only like Photoshop and I just want to manipulate pictures. I don't care anything about vector drawing, but at least you'll know how to manipulate vector drawings and know how to do basic drawings in case you ever have to interact with an object in Illustrator or a vector object that you're using in Photoshop. So it's really important that you at least are exposed to the basics. So I'm going to stop the recording now, because it's been a little over 2 hours, which is a little longer than I like to do for a recording, but week 1, it's kind of the nature of the beast. Let's see how you do with your homework. Communicate with me if you have any challenges while you're starting the process, and let's have some fun drawing in Illustrator. It really is fun. So don't beat yourself up at the beginning as you're starting your drawing process, because it will get better. So I'm going to stop my recording. It takes 15 minutes or so for the recording to download to the cloud, and then I'll post it in the announcement section. If you need to rewatch it, remember there's a password attached to the link that you're going to need to paste in the little dialog box in order to watch the recording over again. And you can watch it over and over again if you want. So just know that it's there for you, and let's see how you do learning the very introductory aspects of Adobe Illustrator. Okay, gang, I'm going to stop the recording, but I'm going to keep the chat window open, and we have some interaction in class too. So just give me a second as I kind of stop the recording.